So what are the 10 top strongest devil based on actual fear? It probably isn't the Chainsawman devil that's just cuddly, but I'll say two things before we go into the actual video. It's the viewer warning in the beginning is serious, right? We will have one fear, and I will give an extra warning then before we go into the fear in the list, which I will show images of it, natural images, and more people freak out seeing that, right? It probably would be the #1 winner if more people knew about that fear. So if you probably know what I'm talking about, it's a very, very repulsive image. That's the first thing, okay? So that's an actual warning, okay, guys? Secondly, I do have a degree in this subject, in the fear itself. No, but seriously though, I do have a degree in, human behavior patterns, or right, human behavior expertise. And I will do my best to give you an actual entertainment, but also an actual explanation of the phobias and so on. And hopefully you guys like the videos of business scraps and so on. Spend a lot of hours, of course, going over the different lists, going across culture, analyzing different phobias and so on. But I hope I can also be entertaining and also give you a little bit of explanation of why some of these fears are very common and why some of the devils to be very, very powerful, both on a power base but also on the actual fear itself to be created, right? So put a couple below if you think that very interesting, and if this top 10 fear is what you expect, right? Number 10, Cynophobia, fear of dogs. This might surprise you then, right? Fear of dogs. Why isn't that fear of sharks? Like sharks and so on? No, the dog devil would be way stronger than the shark devil based on fear alone, definitely. Maybe, yes, of course, a shark is more dangerous in the water than, a dog is. But from an actual, fear standpoint, the fear of dogs are way, way more common and so on, right? So I'm kind of happy that we have this werewolf, whatever. I guess the guy would be like a werewolf, right? The actual, they would be like, yeah, like werewolf type, right? But I really like it that we start with this fear, because a lot of people, I think, don't understand, right, how the actual fear power will be, right? In the sense that these demonic creatures, right, they get power based on how many people are afraid of them, right? And the thing is that, yes, people are afraid of sharks, for example, right? And sharks are, pretty dangerous in the water and so on. But how often do you actually meet a shark, right? How often do you actually interact with a shark? Very, very uncommonly, right? But a dog, almost every day, yeah. If you live in industrial countries, you see dogs all the time, incredibly common animals, right? So think about that. So a lot of people, like 20% of people in industrial countries, are afraid of dogs, right? To some extent, that people are really afraid of dogs. And of course, again, it's because the frequency you actually meet a dog is incredibly, incredibly high. So first of all, the fear of dogs can be created, right, by seeing a dog do something. A dog barking at you, a dog biting you, seeing a dog bite someone else, right? So it's a lot of instances in your life that you might get the fear of dogs, right? The actual phobia might be something you learn, right, from your life. And then you actually have to meet dogs so often that is actually one of the most common fears. So it has a very high frequency, very high, common percentage of people having afraid of it. And of course, if it creates a kind of werewolf man, right? We've seen many, many animals, so one with very powerful werewolves and moose. So I think it would be a pretty good top 10 spot. Number 9, Nosophobia, fear of being sick. Now we are at Pestilence, basically, right? A classic fear that you see in, especially the Middle Ages, right? With the plague and so on. And I think especially, of course, represented by the plague doctor then, right? You can see, for example, overhauling macadamia and so on, right? A very common creature in today's culture, right? With the plague mask and so on. And this is basically the fear of just getting ill in general speaking, right? Of course, would be an extremely common fear, one of the most common fears that everyone has. And as I keep saying here, right? You think about the top 10 fears here, right? From a psychological standpoint, right? For example, you have the fear of driving cars, which is called vehicle phobia or VO-phobia. That fear is very high, for example, in America, right? In Canada and so on. North America, the fear of driving is very common, right? But look at a global scale. How many people are afraid of driving in a country with many cars, right? For example, I'm from Sweden, right? In Sweden, yes, cars are very common, don't get me wrong, but Sweden, like Japan, has very good, but comparably more to Japan than America, right? Sweden has a lot of transit, right? A lot of commute, a lot of train and so on. Japan, of course, has very good commute, right? So in Japan, the fear of driving is much less common, but the fear of being sick then, of course, extremely common, right? Because everyone gets sick, right? This is, again, I like something, the dog thing I said, very, very common. Dogs are everywhere, right? Dogs, again, not the most dangerous animal, but a very common animal, right? And this then fear then, the fear of pestilence, the fear of some kind of sickness, right? Of course, again, extremely common, because everyone in every culture is afraid of getting sick, right? Any country, developed, industrial country, whatever, doesn't matter, right? The fear of sickness exists in everywhere. So that, of course, is why this fear is very, very common, right? And the actual power, I guess, of the devil would be some plague. I know that the violence devil is the head of plague mask, but I definitely imagine some kind of plague doctor, right? Throwing out sickness, pestilence. We've seen a lot of, some kind of undead power, perhaps. We've seen a lot of anime and movies, so on. Yeah, some kind of sickness guy, gas clouds or whatever, right? So you can imagine a bit powerful devil to fight spell, right? Number 8, Thanatophobia. You will certainly probably heard about the fear of death, right? Given the name Thanos, very famous with Marvel, one. So of course Thanos is a Greek god, or rather the Titan, I suppose, right? Of death, right? Hades is the death realm, right, in mythology, but Thanos, or Thanatos, or whatever, he's the actual death god, the Shinigami Reaper, right? So this is the fear of death, right, itself, and actually that's also why I say in the comics, Thanos is in love with Lady Death, right? Similar then to, of course, the fear of being sick, right? The fear of death is, of course, again, cross-culture, right? Globally, everyone's afraid of death, right? To some extent, right? This is not the highest yet, right? Think about it. Everyone is afraid of dying, more or less, right? But of course, the degree is less, right? So you have the fears coming later are more common, right, in daily life and so on. But of course, yeah, the fear of death, very, very common. Everyone has it. And obviously, the power itself of Lady Death, right, would be some kind of skeleton guy, right, with a death touch, right? Yeah, probably, right. It would be a very powerful devil because if he touch you, and you will die, probably, right? So, straight up, right? Yeah, probably very, very powerful. Ophidiophobia, fear of snake. So, of course, snake girl, already part of the anime, right? Heavy girl, yeah, heavy Japanese word for snake. This is one of the most common fears in the world. You thought the dog was only fear? No, so like I said, dog fear is very common, right? And people are afraid of dogs, so on, because it's a common animal to meet. But snake fear, man, snake fear is even more common. It's incredibly common. In some countries, it's up to like 60% of people are afraid of snakes. And in some countries, there's 68% people are afraid of snakes. So now we're coming into some really, really common fear here, right? And let me try to explain that so you understand, right? So I think it's interesting because, for example, I have no snake fear. And to some aspect, because I'm from Sweden. So in Sweden, you only have huggorm. Huggorm is this. It's a snake, but it's non-poisonous, right? So I was never taught as a kid. My mom never like. Of course, my mom was like, "Don't play with the snake," right? But I was never really like taught that snakes are poisonous, right? There was never it's no fear of a snake, actually killing you in Sweden, right? So of course, there's no cultural aspect in my life that makes me like deadly afraid of snakes, right? But in other countries, the snakes will actually kill you to bite you, right? An actual venomous snake will kill you. So it actually makes sense though, right? Phobia is supposed to be irrational words, right? But of course it actually makes logical sense to be afraid of poisonous snakes. They actually are dangerous, right? And so, but the other is by itself, right? But like I said, you have to culturally, right, told to you as a kid, right, be afraid of snakes. So that really explains why the snake fear is really, really high in some countries, right? So it does. So even though, basically, right, every country, people are afraid of snakes, right? The fear of snakes is a global thing. But again, in some countries, that is much higher, right? You know what I mean? So it's a little bit. It's not like cross-culturally. It's not the highest fear. But in some countries, it is basically the highest fear, right? So it kind of makes sense if you live in a country with a lot of poisonous snakes, right? So yes, being that. Another thing that's very interesting to point out here, while I had dog fear and the dog devil being very high, number 10, right? Normally, though, most fears in the zoophobia, which is like animal fear, right, are almost never mammals. They're never cats, so on, dogs, so on. Most people are afraid of animals, right, that are not human, So typical dragon thing, right, the snake, right, the reptilians, insects, and so on, are usually much people are afraid of, right, because that's a much more common fear. That is something weird, something alien, right, and so on. And which also because about most movies on aliens doesn't look really human, right? So that's also a very big part of the snake fear, that they move and they're very different than humans. And again, it's a put out that the reason the dog right is number 10 is because dogs are so incredibly common, right? You know what I mean? Otherwise, dog fear would be way lower, right? Yeah, like if we didn't have domesticated dogs, right, in humanity's cities or whatever, dog fear would be way lower, right? Normally speaking, the mammal fear is incredibly low. It's only dog fear that is really high because again, there's so many dogs, right? But snake fear is much more common though, and much more dangerous. Right? But also, as I said, makes so much sense, right? And obviously, when you see the snake girl, the snake power, right? A giant snake, poisonous powers that can bite you. Yeah, I think I want to put out and say one thing though, talking about animal fears. You should be afraid of this crazy thing though. Have you seen Killing Bites? Sharpest Fast Wings? This anime is Hitomi, right? The main character Killing Bites. And she is a honey badger. Those things are scary though, okay? I just want to point it out, right? Because I can imagine that from Sweden, right? And while Hugunden, the snake in Sweden, the common snake in Sweden, and Snook and so on, are non-lethal, right? Over days. Where I'm from in Sweden, it's very common to meet badgers, right? Not honey badger, but badgers, which are bigger than honey badgers, right? The honey badger is the super aggressive, right? The Järv, you know, Wolverine, right? Yeah, the incredibly aggressive animal. Arguably the most aggressive animal is the is the badger, right? And in my hometown, there is a huge, very very high likelihood if you're in the forest to meet the Swedish badger there, which is even bigger than the honey badger. They're less aggressive, but they're even bigger, and they might take you in packs. So that's an actual fear you should have. Okay, so now I have another warning here, right? So now we're gonna go into number 6 here, Trypophobia. So before I show you, I will call it this the fear of small holes, right? So if you've seen this before, this is an incredibly common fear, and yeah, Yandere speaking, you might wanna skip this, right? So here we go. This is Trypophobia. This is the fear of small holes. I am personally not very happy having to look at this thing. I personally feel quite repulsed to see the image, right? So let's try to quickly go over it. I mean, it's like, why, Poshita? Why did I make this video for? Why did I make this? The fear of small holes. Yeah, it's like, no, I don't want to do this. This is my fear. This is my fear. No, I don't think... I will explain it. So it's interesting because the fear of small holes, okay, it's like the most common fear people actually see this shit, right? But it's not a fear you actually naturally have because you don't actually encounter this so much. But yeah, the fear of small holes, man, it's so disgusting. I am genuinely disgusted by this, right? But let me try to explain one reason why it's not winning them. But the Trypophobia, the Trypophobia devil, that would be the most, that would be the strongest devil. That would be. The Trypophobia devil will actually probably be the strongest devil if people knew what it was, right? The reason why it's not number 1, but it actually probably would be number 1, is because people in generally doesn't know about this phobia, right? Because you don't see it. But is it this classic phobia? You go on the internet, oh my god, Trypophobia! This is the strongest devil. So yeah, Trypophobia around, right? We see it commonly used by Ito Junior, right? The master of horror manga and so on, very disgusting guy, yeah. I read it manga and so on, but actually listen here, Trypophobia, the devil itself, I guess, would like shoot holes in you. Yeah, the devil itself would probably be able to, like, you know, make holes in your body, right? So actually it would be dangerous too, right? It'd be like boop, 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 and kill you, right? With that, or like destroy objects by touching it, and it would be like all small holes. So yeah, the actual power of the demonic powers would be pretty powerful, right? Like if you made a contract with the devil, you could just touch anything and you would create like small holes everywhere in like a wall or something. So it would destroy it. You could probably like basically get through any object, right? Basically anything you could touch, I would imagine, would turn into small holes and they would crumble, right? Like a steel door or whatever, or a weapon or whatever. So you can rust them and so on. So the power would probably be very powerful. Maybe you can shoot, you know, projectiles and so on. And yeah, so it actually is, I can see it being a very destructive power itself, right? This phobia, which makes me uncomfortable too, right, honestly, Trypophobia, and this is of course the one that I mostly meant you would skip over, right, if you have this phobia, because it is triggered by seeing the image, right? It's interesting though, and I really mean this, right, from a, you know, sociologist standpoint, right, and leave a comment below if you're interested in this topic more. The thing is that Trypophobia is sometimes seen as another real phobia, in the sense that there is this, like, inherent fear of small holes, right? Because it feels very, very unnatural, very inherently unnatural, and that is why almost everyone that sees these images feel disgusted by them, or like repulsed. It's better word, repulsed by it, right there. It's like an inherent human behavior to be repulsed by small holes, because it doesn't make any sense, right? In a normal situation, yeah. So you go, everyone has that kind of feel to it, right? But in a sense, though, it's not a real phobia, according to some scientists. And I have to say, I agree with them to some extent, depending on how you look at it. Because it is not something people actually are afraid of, right, in a normal life. You know what I mean? Like, you don't go around and be like, oh, small holes. I mean, some people are. But, I mean, you almost never encounter this thing. So it is a phobia that basically is created by the internet, right? Because before the internet, and yes, this is like a manga. I read the manga. I read all of Itu's work, right? But before we had, you know, the internet, the books or whatever, so on, people basically wouldn't be afraid of this thing, right? But it's like an incredibly strong repulsion people have against the images, right? And so thanks to the internet, millions of people now are afraid of trypophobia, right? Or they're disgusted by trypophobia images. But in a natural order, you never would meet it, right? So it's an interesting phobia in that sense, because it is like the strongest phobia that people have. Like I personally also are kind of repulsed by these images. This is one of the easy ones, the manga images, right? But some of them you can easily Google it, and you're like, oh yeah, you're like, oh, I hate this shit. Yeah, I genuinely hate watching the images, right? And it's a very, very, very common again feeling, right? But at the same time, you almost have to basically go out and try to find disgusting images of trypophobia. It's not a natural thing, right? There are some plants or whatever, showed that earlier, exist, right? You can find them plant, beehives, and so on. They just exist as one thing, right? But still, though, 99% of the people, experiencing trypophobia basically have to play a horror game, read a horror manga, give a point, watch a horror YouTube video, right? You don't really feel it otherwise. So it's a very weird phobia in that sense. But that being said, though, it's like 99% of the people that watch trypophobia is feared by it, yeah. So it is, but it's also one phobia that basically you can't almost get immune to, right? In a sense. So it's a little weird, very, very strange phobia, right? How you calculate. But let's put it at number 6 here. Number 5, acrophobia, fear of heights. So the fear of height, then, right? Incredibly common fear. It's like the number 3, number 1 some countries, right? It's the top 3 fear in all totalness. Very, very common fear. And it kind of combines into that the fear of elevators, the fear of flying, and so on. So I want to spend a little bit here, because the fear of elevators and flying and so on usually under the fear of flying, right? Is actually part of the fear of heights. So when you're afraid of flying, you're mostly afraid of getting up in the sky, right? Which actually means you're afraid of heights and not necessarily afraid of flying, right? That being said, though, there's a common thing that if you're afraid of flying, it also might be you're afraid of having no control, right? So you actually, because the pilot is the one flying it, right? So you can't control. For example, if you're driving your own car, you feel you are in control, right? Even though you might be accidents, but it's like you are the driver, right? So there's a fear of having no control. Same thing for a bus, an elevator, and so on, right? And also, of course, claustrophobia, right? The fear of closed space, right? And so on. But that's also, I think, that the fear of flying, which sometimes is seen as a worse fear and height and so on, is like a combination of a bunch of fears, right? So that's why I don't really feel that it actually fits in higher up than the fear of heights. But anyway, what is the power then of the fear of heights? Because I think first I had the fear of heights in a lower bracket, further down, it's like number 10. So I was like, well, the fear of height, incredibly common. But what would actually be the power be, right? The power, though, is incredibly strong. Is gravity, of course. I was like, what would be the demonic power you would have, though? Yeah, it's like, well, actually, why are you falling? Well, it's gravity, right? So actually, this devil would easily be one of the absolutely top dogs, right? Because again, fear of heights is like usually number 3, right? In total fear, it's a very, very common fear, right? In most countries. And then you have the power, I would say, right? Would be like graviton, right? When all the kind of character with gravity powers, yeah, you will be able to control gravity, because that's kind of people are falling down, right? So that would be the fear, because if you're a demon that can create that fear you're afraid of, right, which is the falling down, you would of course force people to fall down, right, even if they're standing up top, right? So of course it's gravity, yeah, and that of course gravity powers, as we see in so many animes and whatever, right? This is a Marvel character, whatever, yeah. It's such a powerful. It's one of the strongest powers, right? Yeah. So the devil of heights is incredibly powerful. Of course, you might disagree with me that it wouldn't be gravity, but I think it makes the most sense. Yeah, I think it actually makes the most sense if the height devil would have gravity powers. That is actually, I think, the natural inherent power they would have, right? Arachnophobia, number 4. So of course, really have the spider waifu. I don't think I have to explain too much what a spider is to people, right? And this might surprise you, because I was just like, the fear of gravity. And I was like, that guy got gravity powers. That is woo. And I do think it's fair to say that the fear of heights, arguably then, would have gravity powers, right? And that is probably much better than being a spider, right? But if you look at it from the actual, again, I think it's very important about it. We're looking at what is the most common fear, right? Cross-culturally, right? Among a lot of people, right? Spiders, yeah. Spider in most countries is the most common phobia, except number 1 according to the list. The winner, of course, is incredibly common. But we're coming to the number 1 soon here. And number 1 is so common that basically 2 to 10 together is less common than the 1. So that one is the winner. But ignoring the first number 1 here, right? Spider fear is incredibly common, okay? In some countries, it's like 70-80% of people. are, I think the general numbers I read is like, because I read on the studies, right, it's like 65 or so % of every woman is afraid of spiders. And I even have this like childhood backstory, like my ex-girlfriend, or at least before we were dating, there was this huge spider on a wall, on like a house wall. We had to walk to school by the time, like 10, 11 or so, right? So forever, some neighbor, they had a gigantic spider on their wall, okay, like a mass spider, and I had to like hold her hand and, you know, walk with her past, and she was like close her eyes, that I could lead her past this house every day at school because she was so afraid of it. So the fear of spider, right, is incredibly common, especially among females for whatever reason. But yeah, with men it's less common, right? Actually, it's a quite big difference, but still, incredibly incredibly common fear, right? Of course, they have the fear of fear of snakes and the fear of dogs, right? But the fear of spiders is usually by far number one. But fear of snakes can also be number one. So it depends on the country. And coming back to the mention earlier, right, that the fear of snakes has venomous snakes, so right. So a little bit like I said, like in Sweden, for example, where I'm from, right, fear of snakes is not very common, right? But fear of spiders is pretty common, yeah. So you know, it depends a bit on, but also of course similarly, you know, poisonous spiders, right, etc. Right, yeah. So also it's a natural, inherent fear, right, in most cultures, in basically every culture, right. You tell people to be like, oh, the spiders, they can poison you and so on. Yeah, it's very, very common, right? So that's like a cultural fear in many, many countries, right, of spiders. Then, of course, spiders are very common, right? You find them in every country, in your house and so on. So the actual frequency you see a spider is very, very high, right? And then spiders have this weird thing. They have 8 legs, right? Bugs have 6 legs. But they have this weird thing, right? It's basically a mushy, a bug, right? 6 legs. Spider 8 legs, right? Arachnids have 8 legs. Then I can look at different water animals too, right? But anyway, so yeah, it's very, very common. They have this weird fur on their head. Because I do have a Spider-Man photo behind me here. Very popular man though, Spider-Man. Very popular man. But also one reason, right, thinking about why is Spider-Man popular for. I mean, Spider-Man is a well-written comic, right? Obviously, I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. But also one reason I think why Spider-Man is very famous, right, is because of course the fear of spider and the power the spider has by climbing, webbing and so on is very, very culturally, how say, you know, known, right? Everyone knows what a spider is, right? Everyone knows the spider, the scorpion and so on, the very similar animals, right? Everyone knows, you know, those animals where, you know, a bunch of other animal, like powerful animal hybrid humans wouldn't be as appealing, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, the rhino guy. I mean, rhino, you know, yeah, it's okay, you know what a rhino is, but you know, a spider is definitely more. Oh, a spider, yeah, those are predators. So yeah, the spider devil should probably, honestly, really stronger than the gravity because the fear of spiders is so much more common, right? So I will leave it up to you guys. Leave a comment below extra thing, yeah, because I do feel that the gravity powers are better, right? Personally, from a power standpoint, like gravity versus spider powers. But the spider would have like 10 times more power, so like 10 times more fear. Like we have like a fear, you know, I'm trying to be like, we have like a fear bar, right? And like a power bar. Yeah, the spider power I would say is weaker than the gravity power, but the spider, like the actual, you know, how much spider power you have is much more, right? So it's a little bit like, yeah, but you have so much people afraid of spiders. But anyway, then I can say, spoil for this then, right? This is the last animal, yeah. So the fear of spiders is by far the most common animal fear, right? Number 3, claustrophobia. Claustrophobia, of course, then, right? I love this image here, keep the same. I already mentioned it earlier, right? This is, of course, a very common fear. And I would say that the 2 words you hear the most, that probably we're talking about phobias, when I went to grad school and so on, is probably claustrophobia, right? And I mentioned, of course, acrophobia, height fear, right? Those 2 phobias are very, very common in the you know, just generally language, right, in most countries, which shows you that it's a very common fear. As I mentioned earlier, of course, claustrophobia then takes place in everyday life, right? People just going in someone's house, people being on a bus, on an airplane, on an elevator, right? So basically, any time, you know, people with claustrophobia has to do most anything indoors, right? Or go on a car or whatever, they have fear, right? So it's very hard, but it also means you might be afraid of just, you know, a lot of people, right? So it's a little bit of agoraphobia, which is not in the list then, which is the fear of open spaces, right? A little bit of that fear as well, right? Like a lot of people are surrounding me, like a rock concert over, right? I'm afraid I'm getting close in and so on, right? But yeah, a very, very common fear, extremely common fear. Not a winner. The winner is, again, I mentioned earlier, very, very easily winner. But in some countries, the second highest fear, right? And I think the powers were pretty good too. I'm thinking about what the power actually mean, right? The first, I'm thinking about the boys. So I'm gonna spoil the boys through here, but it's very briefly, right? There's a person in the boys. They can like explode heads, right? They call it a head popper because the person kind of like, you know, shrinks the head in and pops them, whatever, something like that, right? So that's probably what this power would be, right? Someone can actually kind of like control space and you just kind of, you know, implode you, right? Like crush you indoors. So the character, I think, represents this power pretty well. Gaara from Naruto, of course, right? Think about it, right? You have the Gaara, he can have a sand thing, kind of capture you, does the sand tube, right? That is probably how this power would work. And again, then, claustrophobia being such an incredibly common fear, and the power would probably be to control space around people, right? So instead of having like Gaara, we can control sand, right? I guess imagine maybe it's like Dove or something, where you can kind of control everything, you know what I mean? Like walls and doors, or yeah, I guess the person would be able to control any kind of object around someone and try to crush them, right? That's probably what you can do. Or like the head popper in Boston, and even be able to crush someone's body by just by, you know, like just imploding their own body, right? So the contract with claustrophobia will be very powerful, because either you'd be like Gaara and be like, right? Or at least, or as I imagine, you get power to touch people and just be like, you know, crush them, yeah, you just like meat in them, right? Like a person in Macadamia as well, yeah, you touch someone and their body is like, right? So this is probably an extremely little power. And again, then, claustrophobia is incredibly common, right? Very, very common, cross-culturally, right? So many incidents, and also very frequent fear, right? Just going indoor, going to the elevator, going to the car, going to the bus, gonna fly. Incredibly common, frequent fear, right? So the claustrophobia devil be very, very powerful, right? And then the power, I think, similar to gravity, actually quite similar to gravity, but yeah, they will be very, very powerful. But the thing is that this is probably more dangerous, right? than gravity power. Imagine you can kind of control everything around someone, yeah, the space around them, so kind of space power, right? Yeah, and I mean space as in like, you know, spatial power, not like space, as in, you know, not as in stars. I mean as in space, as in, you know, yeah, as in like that kind of space, right? Spatial powers, yeah. But it's reality spatial powers. So probably an incredibly strong power, similar, I think, to Eternity Devil. Number 2. Astraphobia, fear of lightning. So now then we have one of the classic powers, right? And I was thinking about this list because this definitely is in the top 10 list, right? Astrophobia, the fear of lightning and storms or stars or whatever. So you probably heard the word Astra before, right? It's commonly, it's an animal called Astra, so on. It's a very common word. It's kind of like Greek for like, you know, from the stars, right? Or to the stars or whatever. Astra, the Astra and so on. So Astra, yeah, like something to do with stars or lightning or weather, perhaps. So one thing we can say too is that Astraphobia, the devil of Astra, might have the power to not only be lightning, but also like be storms, weather, and so on. So it might have some more powers too. So depending on like a contract with the devil, you might have different powers depending on, you know, your personality or whatever. And maybe, right, how much they like you. I can easily see the Astraphobia devil be like, oh, I like you, you get lightning powers. I like, you get rain powers, yeah. So it might even be a little bit different as well. But generally speaking, right, it is the power of lightning, like of course Enuru in One Piece, Electro in Spider-Man, very, you know, classic power, and of course Livewire, the waifu here in DC Comics. And one thing though, as we know if you see One Piece, is that Enuru is a very powerful character, right? Now of course he has other powers to use lightning, but still one of the best fruits, arguably, right, is of course a light fruit in One Piece. However, he lacks one thing, right? That is modern technology, right? So like Livewire here, a common enemy, common bad girl, right, in DC Comics. She can, you know, run around in electric circuit, right? She can jump into a building, she can hide in a TV, basically, right? Save the electric, right? These characters, right, in Marvel Comics without the powers, are even worse to fight, right, than Enuru, right? Because Enuru, while having one of the best fruits in One Piece, I would say, one of the best lookers, right? He still is like living in kind of the middle-aged Renaissance time, right? But if you have a modern lightning living powers, like Livewire, right? For you a living lightning lady, right? Electric waifu, right? They can fly around in electric circuits and basically teleport North City by going into the wire and so on, right? And then also being living lightning when you fight and so on. I mean, obviously, what can I say right there? Being lightning is even better, right, if you live in modern technology. And Chainsawman, of course, taking place in basically our reality, right, our world, and talking about, you know, in Chainsawman universe, and also all about our universe, right? Very, very powerful power, right? And all technology is lightning. You can EMP stuff. You can. It's like cool. I mean, what can I say? Yeah, living lightning, it is typically one of the best powers in most, you know, fantasy. Secondly, the reason I have it at number 2 though, is also because Astraphobia is also one of the phobias that everyone has, right? So, let's think about it, right? Talking about it in this list here. You have phobias that are very, very common, right? They are stronger, right? Because they're so common. And then you have phobias that are perhaps not as common, but the power lifts up a bit, right? Yeah, okay, like, yeah. So, again, Astrophobia makes you basically into live wire, right? So you're living lightning, okay? So this is a very good devil. This devil is like, well, living lightning. Incredible power, right? Yeah. And then you follow up a bit, well, how many people are afraid of lightning? Everyone. That's the issue, right? Yeah. Everyone is naturally afraid of lightning. No one was hit by lightning, right? And similar to like spider fear and snake fear and so on, right? There's an inherent rationality, right? It's not a purely phobia. Oh yeah, spider snakes. You know, there's actually an actual danger of being bitten by a venomous snake. I talked about earlier, right? Of course, obviously, but being hit by lightning is also pretty dangerous, right? So there's a natural, like, actually, I probably don't want to go into like a thunderstorm, right? A thunderstorm can knock out your boat, your airplane, and so on, right? And you can die from that, right? So lightning is actually like physically dangerous, people, right? So it's not only so in that sense, astrophobia, right, is not very phobia. Again, phobia means irrational fear, right? But being afraid of lightning isn't actually irrational. In most cases, it's actually rational to be afraid of, right? But this is what it's called, right? But you get my point. Being afraid of lightning is very rational, right? In most cases, right? Furthermore, of course, this is completely, cross-country, country, doesn't matter, right? Everyone, again, is afraid of lightning. Because, like I said earlier, spider fear depends on spiders in your country, right? Even more, can I imagine, snake fear, like I said, right? Yeah, snake fear. In Sweden, Stefan, not a thing, right? There's no poisonous snake in Sweden, so you're not really afraid of snakes. You're more afraid of the badger than the snake. You really, the badger is dangerous, man, and the wild boars, yeah, and the foxes and the wolves, well, not foxes, but there are other animals that you're way more afraid of in Sweden, in Sweden's forest, than the snake. It's like snake is like the lowest thing you're less afraid of. Yeah, every other animal is more dangerous than snake, basically, right? But lightning, right? Doesn't matter where you live, of course. Some countries have more lightning storms, right? Obviously, right? But you get my point. Like, no matter where you live, if you're hit by lightning, yeah, that's pretty bad. And everyone's like, oh shit, lightning and so on, right? So lightning fear is culturally, the same, right? Basically, right? Everyone's afraid of lightning. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter your gender, everyone's afraid of lightning. Okay, so that's very, very high up on the list, right? Another thing, you can't really avoid lightning fear either, right? Because if you're afraid of heights, you can like, okay, I won't go flying, Like I have a relative, she, has acrophobia. She will never fly, right? She doesn't go to elevators, she hates flying, also the train, she avoids getting up to high, places, right? Yeah. You can avoid acrophobia, right? You can, to some extent, avoid arachnophobia, right? You can definitely avoid ophidiophobia, snake phobia, like depending on how you live in, but you can definitely avoid that. You can avoid many of these phobias, right? And also other, of course, phobias not in the list here, but you get my point. But you can't really avoid, lightning. Yeah, you can't avoid weather. It's always gonna be a lightning storm in your life, every now and then. And even if you then stay inside, of course, right, for the lightning, you have lightning balls, you have the sound, right? So that's also a thing that even if you are afraid of lightning, you can't avoid it because you hear the bam, bam, bam. So you're always gonna have the lightning fear, right? And of course, lightning fear, especially among children, is very, very common, right? So, and you also have lightning fear in animals, right? Like every animal is also afraid of lightning. I don't know if that counts for the devil's power, but lightning is also scaring, dogs and cats and everything else in the forest. So it also has the power of every animal being afraid of it, right? It's a natural fear, right? Of like fire and lightning and so on. Yeah. So I mean, it's like a incredibly. It gets bonus points from the dog. It's also afraid of it. So yeah, lightning fear is like the most natural, inherent fear we have, right? So I think it's an easy number 2, right? Yeah. Again, probably one of the best actual powers, right? Being living lightning, plus having a complete cross-culturally, any country, every human, every animal is naturally afraid of lightning, right? Massive number 2. So, before we go to number 1, I just want to point out 2 other fears that are not very powerful. I just want to point them out there. So, the first one is the fear of force, Tetraphobia. This is probably the weakest devil because this is usually the least common fear in the country. And basically, it's mostly in some countries, all hell's fear. So you're afraid of number 4, which already is like, that's a, incredibly uncommon fear, right? And what would the actual demonic powers be? Oh, he can throw, he's a 4 or something? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe he can do math, he can make money or something, I don't know. So, yeah, that's probably the weakest devil, and I might make another video where I'm like, what's the worst devil to be? It's the Nomophobia. Nomophobia is the fear of your mobile phone not working, like out of battery, or have no Wi-Fi and so on. This is a fear that I'm trying to be serious, but it's an actual fear that's on the rise, guys. So this is actually one of the most common fear among teenagers in America. Of course it is. So, you know, if you're youth under 18, this is one of the most common fears. The fear of your cell phone not working, so you can't go to social media, is an incredibly common fear. But of course, this is a fear that basically doesn't exist, right, in, you know, countries where they don't have many cell phones, right, and so on. Yeah, so it's very like a industrial problem and very, you know, mostly American problem. But probably in the future, the cell phone devil will be very powerful. Okay, so what is the number one fear then? Is it the fear of the future? Is it height? Is it spider? No, it's social phobia. Number one, yes, get your dislike button up. Number one is the fear of social interaction. So seriously, yeah, the fear of social interaction is the number one phobia in the world. And other people say this sounds crazy. You had like living lightning, you had gravity powers, and now it's social phobia fear. But first of all, right, if you look at this from an actual psychologist, I'm trying to be, you know, as serious as I can be, you know, in my wifey room here with my pochita, but I'm being deadly serious here, right? Social interaction fear. This devil, these demonic powers would be like 100 times any other demonic power, like at least, right? If you think about it as a meter, right? How many mana points, whatever, would the demon have, right? Okay, how many, you know, phobia points would it have, right? Yeah, this demon would have more phobia points than every other demon combined, right? So this is the most, like, you have to think about that this fear is so incredibly more common that like 19 times of the people have this phobia. Unless if you're a complete sociopath, basically. So everyone has this phobia. That's number one. This is the most frequent phobia. So this is the most common phobia to have in every culture, right? And it also is the most like frequent phobia to actually have to interact with on a daily basis life, right? So it's the highest frequency, by far high frequency, and also the most common phobia. Probably why it also is the highest phobia. So altogether, right, the phobia points of social phobia is like 1,000,000 times higher than all of them combined, right? So that alone would make the social devil the strongest devil all of them. Yeah, it would be the absolute strongest devil. Like, holy moly, what does devil have? Like in infinite more points, right, than any other demon, right? So that's the first thing you have to put up. Right? It really would be incredibly powerful. And let me try to explain this a little bit from a actual, you know, again, social, from a behavior scientist standpoint, right? For example, anecdotal, but still, I'm an extrovert. I'm sitting here on YouTube being, oh, you're talking about phobias, right? I'm an extrovert, right? So I don't have simple stage fright. Right? I never had stage fright. I can go up and talk on a stage. I enjoy it. I used to give lectures, right? In not maybe a fear topic, but like behavior topics, right? And I enjoy it, right? I never had stage fright. But for example, when I'm 12, whatever, right? If I'm gonna go and ask a girl out, you know, I get a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of social interaction, right? So if I have a stage fright then, which is not a fear then, that fear is mostly controlled by your, one of the big fives, right? Extrovert, introvert, right? But social phobia, social anxiety phobia, which is the interaction between humans, right? The actual interaction between you and maybe your potential girlfriend or whatever, or your mom, or talking to your sister, talking to your friend, talking to your, you know, your boss or whatever. All this stuff, right? Yeah. All of that stuff, right? Social interaction, right? Is something that isn't really like helped by your extrovert versus introvert, right? So again, then if you're highly extroverted, right, stage fright is probably not a thing. You even enjoy it, right? So that, for example, you can be immune to, right, depending on your personality, right? Where of course, if you have high nervosity, you will have more phobia, social phobia, definitely. So of course, you can have the butcher, the commissar, etc., that kind of fear, right? So I'm not saying that everyone has the same level, right, of social phobia, right? Obviously, social phobia is much higher for some people, right? But it's just that, but this is like a phobia that everyone has, no matter what personality you have, right? The only people that wouldn't have this phobia, arguably, is people that are complete sociopaths. And I mean like actual, real 40 out of 40 psychopath traits, because if you're an incredible sociopath, you will have like no empathy whatsoever, right? And if you have no empathy, so you basically have zero concern for how other people act with you or how you act with people, right? Then you might not have this phobia. But this is like sort of an incredibly uncommon behavior to have, because even a typical psychopath will have very high empathy, very low sympathy. So, but they still have a lot of empathy. So they still might be nervous, making a mistake. Because even if you're gonna manipulate someone by a psychopath, typically, you still are nervous, right? They get, they're gonna catch up on you, this stuff and so on, right? But a sociopath, like a real hard sociopath, doesn't actually care like psychopath does. It's a different thing there. There's not a video, but basically it's a different thing. So you have to be like the anti-personality disorder, right? OSPD. You have to have that thing. You have to have the specific trait of that. So it's like the needle in the haystack, out of the needle in the haystack, right? It's like a chest in the chest. You know what I mean? You basically need to have the cake on a cake on a cake, right? You can't get into that personality where you have no concern, right, for this phobia whatsoever. So it's less than 1% people, right, that actually are immune to this phobia. It's probably like 0.001 of them, right? So it's incredibly uncommon, because even people that have typically OSPD traits, like narcissists or whatever, will still have this phobia. Right? So it's basically, this is the most, by far, common phobia that everyone has. But of course, different degrees of it, right? And obviously, if you have a high disagreeable trait and you're very, very basically high OSPD, generally speaking, you will have this phobia lower, and typically males will have lower, and narcissists will have lower as well. But it still is like a, like 9 people have it at different degrees, right? So it's by far the most strongest thing. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's also a thing you will experience constantly, right? Going to school, going to work, going over there, going to buy that stuff, going to the grocery, going to the gym. It's also a thing you will constantly experience all the time in your life, right? Which makes it the most powerful fear, right? But okay, how will the fear actually be then as a power? Because that I will admit that I do think, of course, that like the living lightning, gravity, and like, space control or whatever is probably a better power to have. But as I keep saying, right, this sociophobia, it is so incredibly powerful. The sociophobia devil would be like 1,000 times stronger, right? From an actual, like the buff, yeah, she will be really buff. No, but seriously, right? I keep saying it, but I can't emphasize more on how much more like physical strength or whatever, right? The social phobia lady would have. Yeah, she probably be like, a million times stronger than the other devils combined, right? In her pure, like, she's a buff. She would be a brick, So, seriously speaking, right? But actually, I think the power probably would Yandere. Yeah, I think you probably would see a Yandere lady, Unigasai. Yeah, I think a Yandere is probably what you actually would see. Yeah, you would see like a super powerful. You would see like Unigasai if she had like a million times more physical strength, something, speed, or whatever. That's probably what I imagine seriously, right? Because what is the kind of antithesis, right, of these powers? As I said, I imagine that the fear of heights will give you gravity powers, right? Because you can cause people gravity, right? So the fear of like social interaction should create a person or a demon then, or a contract or whatever, a fiend then, depending on how what his structure is. But they should construct a person, right, so to speak, that is the opposite, right, of a good interaction, right? Which basically would be a super codependent, sociopath, psychopath, yeah. So the power would probably be like the worst Yandere girl ever, right? Yeah, that would probably be the power, yeah, like seriously, yeah. I mean, because the opposite of like a good interaction, right, or like a good girlfriend or a good date or whatever, is the super heinous monster girlfriend from hell, right? So, so it probably actually would be like Yandere, yeah. It actually probably would. I mean, I'm trying not to make it funny here. This is entertainment, but I'm also like seriously like, yeah, the opposite of a good social interaction is Yandere, right? Yeah, this devil will be like the worst person ever. And also think about it too, right? We have something the violence devil, right? He likes to fight, he likes to punch stuff, yeah. The anti-personality disorder devil, right? That's kind of what I guess we call it devil. The devil will be social phobia, so the actual devil would be a Yandere, like anti-personality disorder devil. That would be antisocial, right? That would be the actual person. So also the devil would be a heinous monster. Like seriously, this devil would also be the worst person ever. Because think about it, this devil would be like 100% psychopathic and psychopathic, right? Again, because it's the reverse of a good social interaction, right? So which means that his personality would be the absolute worst, right? It would be like a complete sadistic person, right? He would enjoy killing everyone. He would enjoy everything bad. Yeah, the devils are already kind of, bad, evil, right? But this would probably be the most evil devil too. I mean, honestly, I guess one way you can look at it is evil. Yeah, I guess one way you could summarize it is that this devil would be like pure evil. Yeah, it would be the worst personality you could think of, right? So, so it's like pure demonic evil. It'd be like sinister. It'd be enjoying batting in your blood, right? It'd be like, yeah. It would be kind of chaotically evil. Anyway, guys, I hope you guys liked the video. Please subscribe to the episode. What do you guys think? Does this top 10 fit your list of top 10 fear, right? I think that you probably heard about all the fears in this list, right? Of course, there are a bunch of other fears I didn't put in the list. That was almost put in the list. For example, fear of driving. We have other fears like injections, pretty common fear, right? Fear of germs is pretty common. There's a fear called emetophobia, which is pretty common actually, which is the fear of puking or fear of being puked. So it's actually pretty high. Yeah, it's like a top 20 list. In most countries, that's actually a pretty high fear. Puking fear is actually pretty common. So there's a lot that we can talk about there, right? But anyway, guys, so you guys can have a great day.